The queen immediately felt herself being hoisted up and flung violently on the ground. She let out a loud screech from the pain she felt upon hitting the ground. Before she could even catch her breath, the same actions were repeated once again. This time she screamed at the top of her lungs, begging for mercy. "She was my only daughter, and you killed her?" The priestess grabbed the queen, throwing her against the wall this time. With her staff, she had supernatural strength. "Hear me out, please," Queen Tati pleaded as the priestess motioned to grab her again. She tried calling on her guards for help, but no one came to her rescue. She realized the priestess must have gotten rid of them all before she came onto her, as she did not even flinch when she called on them. She must have known they weren't there to respond. The priestess grabbed and tossed the queen again like a rag doll. "I helped you when you needed me, and this is how you repay me? Kill my only daughter? Because she refused to do your selfish bidding?" The priestess was now overwhelmingly emotional and had started crying. "Your daughter was not even made queen yet, and she was already challenging my authority," the queen retorted, justifying her actions to her friend. The priestess's demeanor and her attack on her confirmed to her that she must already know the truth, so she did not see the point of denying it. Instead, she tried to convince her that her daughter's death was not her fault. "My orders meant nothing to her, so I did what I had to do," she added, not even a little bit scared of the priestess. She believed that the priestess was not going to kill her. She had sworn not to kill any man, or she would lose her honor and ability as the chief priestess of the kingdom. And even after I visited her quarters to warn her for the last time, she had the audacity to challenge me. She even went further to have that wretched girl in her quarters when I had just left it. That was not only disrespectful, but it was very daring of her. It was like my words meant nothing to her. The queen continued her rant. Helima's mother went in to grab her again, screaming, "So you kill her?" "Yes, and I do not regret it for a second. At least now she knows that I am not to be disobeyed." On hearing this, using her staff, the priestess flung her against the wall with all her might. She pulled out a poisonous dagger and started walking towards her. "You know what happens when you kill me. I am protected by the great spirits. You will lose your gift of sight and your stature in this kingdom, and we both know how long it took for you to be able to embrace it. Everything you have ever fought for will be in vain if you dare to use that dagger on me," the queen threatened, hoping this will deter her friend from killing her. The priestess, because of her lineage and power, was the only person that could hurt her and get away with it unscathed. She will only lose her stature and gifts. "She was my daughter," the priestess screamed, stabbing the queen, who was in shock at what was happening to her. She was surprised that despite her threats and warning, the priestess was attacking her. She stabbed her again. "I will exile myself if I have to, and I don't care what I lose. But you will pay for what you did to my child. I cannot and will never spare you. My daughter was all I had, and you took her from me without remorse, so you will have to pay with your own life." Tears rolled down her face as she continued to stab the queen. When she had spent her energy and the queen was on the ground in a pool of her own blood, she finally left her chambers. She ran out of the queen's quarters, hoping that she could leave the kingdom before she was found out. As she ran, she could feel a change in her body. She knew this could only mean that her powers were being stripped off. A sharp lightning flashed across the sky and struck the ground, and she also knew this was a warning from the gods to leave and never return. Despite these frightful events, the priestess was not afraid. She was only crying out of sadness over being denied the opportunity of being at her daughter's burial to pay her last respects. She looked back as she ran, and she saw that her footsteps were being wiped away by the wind. It was an act from the gods. They wished to remove all traces of her from the kingdom and all memory of the kingdom from her mind, so she can never return. Meanwhile, the search party that had gone to look for the princess had just returned to the palace with her body in tow. There were cries and screams all over the palace. As they laid her body before the king's throne in front of the king and his council, they also brought forth Lalia and the attacker. The physician was then summoned to examine the body to determine what really killed the princess. When he explained that it was an arrow that had pierced her waist, one of the men immediately squealed, "It must be this arrow." The men brought forth an arrow, handing it over to Nayo's father, who confirmed that it was indeed the arrow that must have pierced and killed the princess. One of the people shouted out that the arrow belonged to Lalia, and everyone gasped in shock at the revelation. "I have seen her carry arrows like it when she goes on her hunting trips on her back. I am certain that this one too belongs to her," the man said, defending his claim. This caused uproar in the king's court. "Silence!" the king bellowed, and a dead silence fell on the country yard. "Lalia, what have you got to say for yourself?" He turned to his ward, willing her to speak up to clear her name, for he could not accept that Lalia could commit such a horrendous act. Her eyes had turned red and were swollen at this point from all the crying she had been doing. She was also very weak as the arrows were all poisoned. It was thanks to the Ajulu herb that she was slowly getting healed from the poison inside her. She pointed her hand towards the attacker and said again, "It was his doing." "It was the both of us. How else will we have gotten access to her arrows?" the man screamed back, speaking for the first time. The man feigned anger towards Lalia for betraying them. He was insinuating that they were in cohorts with Lalia and their plans were to kill Princess Helima. "The both of us were equally responsible for the murder of the princess. We snuck out into the bushes the night of the curfew to attack the princess on her way back from the shrine." "Why are you doing this to me, Lalia?" He forcefully wrung himself free from the grasp of the men who had been holding him captive to attack Lalia, who was still in shock over his words. She was like a statue where she stood, trying to understand the unfolding events. Some of the people watching the fiasco were eager to believe the man and quickly started attacking her before the man could even get to her. They did not even give her a chance to explain herself. It was like they had all been holding a grudge against her, and no sooner had they surrounded her than she collapsed at their feet in shock and exhaustion. Even though the king had called the crowd to order, they were so relentless that the guards had to intervene to stop them from hitting her. Lalia was immediately taken to Nayo's father's chambers to be attended to, as she was now suffering from some wounds the angry crowd inflicted on her. The people had started grumbling. To them, the fact that she was out the night during the curfew was enough to prove her guilt over Helima's death. Most of them were already certain that Lalia killed her. After all, they had never liked each other and could never stand to be in the presence of each other. Most of the elders in the king's council agreed with the people's analysis, making it harder for the king to stand in defense of his poor ward. The way the assassin easily blamed Lalia made the king to realize that he was certainly lying, as assassins don't easily confess the truth like that unless they are brutally tortured. Some would even take days of torturing before confessing. This made him suspicious of the speed and ease with which the assassin was ready to give up Lalia as his cohort in the execution of this heinous crime.